Traveller, imagine a single human footprint pressed into wet ash beneath a darkened sky, long before cities, before writing, before memory itself had a name. You're not here by accident. Something older than history has quietly guided you to this moment. What if almost everything we believe to be human history is only the final heartbeat of a much longer life? Modern humans have walked this planet for over 300,000 years, yet our written story remembers barely the last 5,000. The rest lies in silence, bones beneath shifting sands, painted hands fading on cave walls, stars watched by minds identical to yours. Tonight we follow the missing years not as myth, but as deep time where science brushes against wonder. Stay with me. Let's drift a little deeper. A single human footprint hardens in ancient ash beneath a sky, untouched by names, borders, or memory. Dawn spreads slowly across a landscape that has never known cities, never heard the sound of metal, never felt the weight of written history. Above it, the same stars you know hold their positions with quiet indifference, patient witnesses to lives that came and went without record. Traveller, you did not arrive at this moment by accident. Some journeys begin long before awareness pulled forward by forces older than intention, older than language, older even than history itself. For more than 300,000 years, minds shaped exactly like yours have existed on this planet. Same cranial volume, same neural architecture, same capacity for language, imagination, empathy and wonder, and yet almost everything we call history occupies only the last 5,000 of those years, a thin sliver, a fragile veneer. The rest of humanity's existence stretches behind us in silence unmarked by ink or stone, remembered only through fragments scattered across geology and bone. What we call prehistory is not a blank page. It is a library burned so thoroughly that only ash remains. I speak as someone who has spent long nights alone with instruments, humming softly, screens glowing with incomplete data maps layered with dust from places that no longer exist as they once did. The deeper we search, the more obvious it becomes that absence is not proof of emptiness. It is proof of erasure. Time does not preserve by default. Time edits. Erosion is the planet thinking, slowly deciding what may remain and what must dissolve back into mineral memory. The human brain did not suddenly awaken 5,000 years ago. There was no switch flipped, no spark of intelligence ignited by civilization. The mind you inhabit is ancient, shaped through countless generations, who learned to read weather in the smell of the air danger, in the movement of grass intention, in the eyes of animals and other humans. The difference between you and someone who lived 200,000 years ago is not intelligence. It is inheritance, knowledge carried forward or allowed to vanish when catastrophe intervened. What were they doing during those missing years? They were not waiting. Waiting is not a human trait. Curiosity predates agriculture. Restlessness is older than cities. Before farming, before borders, before writing pressed symbols into clay, humans were already living full lives beneath skies, unpolluted by artificial light within ecosystems that shifted violently with ice drought, flood and fire. They adapted not by dominating their world, but by listening to it with extraordinary precision. Light itself behaved differently then. The night sky burned brighter without atmospheric haze or electric glow. Radiation from the sun struck harder unfiltered by modern shielding. Gravity pulled bodies the same way, but memory felt closer carried in muscle and ritual rather than record. The universe was not an abstract concept. It was an active presence. Stars were not distant objects. They were navigational tools, seasonal clocks, and silent companions marking survival and loss. We find traces of these people only rarely. A stone tool shaped just so balanced between efficiency and intuition. A bone that healed long before death, proving care and patience within a group. Pigments carried hundreds of miles from their source, suggesting meaning beyond survival. These are not relics of primitiveness. They are frozen echoes of systems we no longer fully understand. Ruins not of cities, but of lives intricately tuned to the planet's rhythms. And here lies the anomaly that unsettles archaeologists and physicists alike. For tens of thousands of years after modern humans emerged, the record appears quiet. No explosion of art, no monuments, no written thought, silence. Not because nothing occurred, but because the materials of that world were temporary. Wood rots, fibre dissolves, skin returns to soil, coastlines drown when ice melts and seas rise hundreds of feet. Entire cultures vanish beneath water sediment, and forgetting leaving no trace for future eyes. Climate is not a background condition in this story. It is the author. Ice advances, ice retreats. Deserts bloom and die. Forests expand and collapse. Each shift erases knowledge that took generations to accumulate. Each catastrophe presses reset without cruelty or intention. Physics has no memory. It obeys rules, not narratives. And yet despite repeated erasure, humans persisted, carrying fragments forward, like embers sheltered from wind. If you listen closely beneath the silence, there is a low hum. Radiation as whisper, gravity as memory, dust as leftover chronology. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is the universe thinking. What if civilization is not humanity's beginning, but its recovery, after countless forgotten resets? What if the missing 100,000 years were not primitive at all, but simply incompatible with permanence? Tonight, traveller, we stand at the edge of that question, not to solve it, not to conquer it, only to observe, to accept that some truths cannot be reconstructed, only respected. In the end, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. Evidence rarely arrives as revelation. It does not announce itself with certainty or closure. It appears quietly, fragment by fragment, like stars emerging one by one as the sky darkens. A tool half buried in sediment, a pattern etched into stone, a chemical signature where none should exist. For those who spend their lives listening to deep time evidence, is not proof of answers, but proof that questions are justified. Traveller, this is where the story becomes heavier, slower, and more precise. The oldest anatomically modern human fossils do not come from a single birthplace or a sudden evolutionary leap. They appear across Africa, scattered through Morocco, Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa, dated to more than 300,000 years ago. High, rounded skulls, flat faces, distinct chins, bodies that would pass unnoticed on any modern street. The implication is unsettling in its simplicity. Humanity did not emerge fully formed at the dawn of civilization. Humanity arrived long before civilization knew it existed, yet anatomy alone does not tell us how a mind was used. For tens of thousands of years after these bodies appeared, stone tools changed very little. The same blades, the same flakes, the same methods repeated across vast stretches of time and space. To modern eyes, this sameness once suggested stagnation. But sameness in archaeology often hides stability. A system that works does not demand innovation. When survival strategies are tuned perfectly to environment change, becomes risk rather than progress. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, something shifts. Pigments appear. Ochre ground into fine powder, carried far from its source, processed with care. You cannot eat ochre. It does not sharpen tools. Its value lies elsewhere in marking, signalling, remembering. The moment humans began carrying colour for no practical reason, the record changes tone. Symbolic thought leaves its first chemical fingerprint faint but unmistakable. Later, still beads emerge. Shells perforated with precision worn against skin identical in form, across communities separated by distance. These are not decorations in isolation. They are statements. Identity made visible. Belonging encoded into objects small enough to carry through migrations and disasters. Once meaning attaches to matter, culture begins to resist erasure, even as the planet continues its slow forgetting. Burials follow. Bodies placed deliberately, limbs arranged, objects positioned nearby. The dead no longer discarded to scavengers or time, but acknowledged, remembered, mourned. Burial is not merely disposal. It is philosophy expressed through labour. To dig a grave with stone tools requires collective pause, shared belief, and recognition that a life persists in memory even when breath has stopped. This is consciousness confronting its own impermanence, and still the evidence remains sparse, not because complexity was absent, but because complexity was fragile. Wood fibre, leather, plant matter, and skin dominate hunter-gatherer technology. These are materials optimized for flexibility, speed, and adaptation, not longevity. When climate shifted, camps moved. When seas rose, coastlines vanished. When drought came, stories migrated while structures dissolved. Archaeology preserves what resists time, not what sustained life. What remains are anomalies that refuse simple explanation. Surgical intervention marks on ancient bones. Trepanation holes healed by living tissue, proving not only medical knowledge, but survival afterward. Long-distance trade routes inferred from materials found thousands of miles from origin. Obsidian carried across continents. Marine shells discovered deep inland. These networks imply communication, planning, and trust, extending far beyond a single band or generation. Astronomy leaves subtler traces, alignments of stones with solstices, seasonal markers embedded in landscape, navigation systems inferred from migration patterns that match stellar cycles rather than geography alone. The sky was not decoration, it was infrastructure. Stars encoded calendars, routes, and survival windows. Light became data long before numbers existed to describe it. Here, evidence brushes against myth. Oral traditions remembered coastlines swallowed by rising seas thousands of years after the floods occurred. Songs encoding navigation routes across open ocean preserved with astonishing accuracy. Stories dismissed as legend until geology confirmed their timelines. Memory, when protected by ritual and repetition, can outlast monuments. Silence, when structured, can carry information longer than writing. But evidence also reveals loss. Entire technological lineages vanished when a single group failed to adapt to sudden change. Boat designs erased when coastal peoples drowned. Medicinal knowledge lost with the last healer who knew exact doses and preparation methods. Experiments that never spread, innovations that remained local insights extinguished before they could accumulate. Progress is not guaranteed. It is fragile, dependent on continuity more than brilliance. Modern science is trained to seek linear advancement, but deep time tells a different story. Intelligence does not climb steadily upward. It branches, stalls, collapses, and restarts. In that branching, countless minds solved problems we will never know existed. The greatest geniuses of human history may have left no artifacts durable enough to survive us. Their discoveries live only in the fact that their descendants endured. To study this evidence is to confront humility. Civilization did not invent intelligence, it concentrated it. Writing did not create thought, it froze it. The long pre-civilized era was not empty, but fluid, adaptive and resilient in ways our rigid systems struggle to replicate. Stability came at the cost of vulnerability. When civilizations fall, they fall hard. When hunter-gatherer systems fail, they dissolve quietly and reform elsewhere. Somewhere beyond our reach, beneath ocean floors and desert sands, lie the drowned archives of humanity's longest chapter. Camps aligned with vanished shorelines. Tools shaped for environments that no longer exist. Knowledge systems tuned to climates erased by ice and fire. We excavate fragments and call them beginnings, but they are endings too. In the end, traveller evidence does not answer the deepest questions. It only confirms that forgetting is the rule, not the exception. What we see is not the full story, but what survived the universe's indifference. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. An anomaly is not a mistake. It is a signal that refuses to fit inside expectation. In science, anomalies are often ignored at first, then argued against, then quietly archived, waiting for a framework that can hold them. Traveller, this part of the journey moves into that unstable territory where evidence no longer aligns neatly, where the past begins to feel less like a straight road and more like a fractured mirror, reflecting possibilities we are not yet prepared to name. Consider this strange tension. For tens of thousands of years, anatomically modern humans leave behind little that looks revolutionary, and then suddenly within a relatively brief window, symbolic behaviour appears almost everywhere at once. Art, music, complex ritual, long-distance navigation. The cognitive capacity was present long before yet its expression erupts unevenly as if unlocked rather than invented. This is not how gradual evolution is supposed to look. It resembles activation more than progression. Archaeologists once called this moment the cognitive revolution, but the term is misleading. There is no evidence that the brain itself suddenly changed. The hardware was already in place. What changed was the pattern of use. Something altered how information moved between minds, how memory accumulated instead of dissolving, how ideas survived individual deaths. The anomaly is not intelligence. The anomaly is continuity. One explanation suggests population density reached a tipping point. When enough humans live close enough for long enough, ideas stop vanishing when a single group fails. Knowledge becomes redundant, stored in many minds at once. But this explanation feels incomplete. Population density alone does not explain the depth of abstraction, the sudden richness of symbolic expression, or the precise timing that appears across continents with no obvious point of origin. Another hypothesis points to language, not communication which existed long before, but fully recursive language capable of embedding stories within stories, instructions within myth, memory within rhythm. Language that could compress complex systems into narratives portable enough to survive migration, disaster, and time. Yet language itself leaves no fossil. We infer it only indirectly through what remains when everything else disappears. Here the anomaly deepens. Neanderthals and Denisovans possessed large brains, complex tools, burial practices, and symbolic behaviour of their own. They were not inferior minds waiting to be replaced. They were parallel intelligences, and yet they vanished. Not gradually, but decisively. Within a few thousand years, multiple human species disappeared while Homo sapiens remained. Intelligence alone did not determine survival. Something else tilted the balance. Perhaps it was social elasticity. Homo sapiens appear to have formed larger, more fluid networks than other species, exchanging mates' tools and stories across vast distances. These networks function like biological insurance systems. When one group failed, another preserved fragments of its knowledge. When climate collapsed locally, information could migrate faster than bodies. Survival favoured not strength but connectivity. But even this explanation feels insufficient, because networks themselves require trust, shared symbols, and abstract commitments to people never personally known. That level of cooperation implies a mythic layer, a shared imagined structure binding strangers together. Belief, not just information, may have been the real technology. Belief as infrastructure. Belief as survival mechanism. This is where archaeology grows quiet and philosophy begins to whisper. What if the anomaly was not technological at all, but perceptual? What if early humans learned to see patterns in time itself, to recognize cycles of collapse and renewal, and to embed those insights into stories that outlived individual lifespans, gravity as memory? Light as signal, myth as compressed science waiting for the right listener. We know climate resets occurred repeatedly. Ice ages advanced and retreated. Sea levels rose and fell hundreds of feet. Volcanic winters darkened skies for generations. Each reset erased physical traces while sparing minds adaptable enough to move. Perhaps the anomaly is not why civilization appeared late, but why it appeared at all, given how hostile permanence is to survival. In this view, civilization is not humanity's default state. It is an anomaly itself. A brief experiment enabled by unusually stable climate conditions at the end of the last ice age. 10,000 years of relative calm allowed storage, accumulation, and hierarchy to emerge before the planet shifted again. Civilization flourished not because it was optimal, but because the environment briefly permitted it. This reframes the missing years not as failure to advance, but as disciplined restraint enforced by reality. Permanence was dangerous. Flexibility was life. Systems that grew too rigid shattered under pressure. Those that dissolved gracefully endured. The anomaly, then, is not lost civilizations, but our insistence that civilization is inevitable. Even today, the pattern repeats. Complex systems grow, extract, accumulate, and collapse. Each collapse erases libraries, languages, technologies, and ways of seeing the world. Survivors rebuild with fragments often unaware of how much was lost. Progress becomes an illusion created by short memory. Deep time sees cycles where we see ascent. Anomalies appear when we discover structures older than expected alignments, too precise for accepted timelines, artifacts out of place. Each one challenges the story we tell ourselves about steady advancement. Most are explained away. Some cannot be. They linger like unresolved equations, reminders that our narrative may be incomplete. There is comfort in linear history. It tells us we are smarter than those who came before. Anomalies threaten that comfort. They suggest intelligence does not accumulate automatically, that it can be squandered, forgotten, or drowned beneath rising seas. They imply that we may not be the first to stand where we stand, only the most recent. I've seen this unease in laboratories late at night when data refuses to conform, when maps contradict models, when silence grows heavier than noise. There is a moment when the scientist stops searching for answers and begins listening instead. Acceptance enters quietly. Peace follows certainty. In the end, traveller anomalies do not demand resolution. They demand humility. They remind us that knowledge is provisional memory, fragile and survival contingent. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of time after meaning has passed through it. In the deep record of humanity, silence is the most common state, stretching across tens of thousands of years, where no voices reach us directly, only impressions pressed faintly into matter. Traveller. This is where the story becomes quieter, heavier, and more difficult to hold, because silence does not explain itself. For most of human existence, nothing was meant to last. Camps were temporary, tools were remade. Stories lived only as long as someone remembered to speak them. Knowledge survived not by being fixed, but by being repeated, adapted, reshaped each time it passed between minds. Writing would one day freeze thought into symbols, but before that, memory was fluid, alive, and vulnerable. When memory failed, nothing remained to mark what had been known. The archaeological record reflects this fragility with brutal honesty. What we recover is not what mattered most, but what resisted decay. Stone survives, bone survives, burned clay survives. The rest dissolves back into the planet's cycles. Entire lifeways vanish without leaving a trace, not because they were insignificant, but because they were perfectly adapted to impermanence. Silence follows not because nothing happened, but because everything moved. Coastal worlds were among the first to be erased. As ice melted and seas rose, shorelines shifted inward mile by mile, drowning camps, harbours, and migration routes. For thousands of years, humans lived where the land met the water, mastering tides, currents, and marine life, with an intimacy we can barely reconstruct. Those settlements now lie beneath oceans sealed under sediment unreachable, without technology that only recently exists. Silence covers them completely. Forests tell a similar story. Wood structures rot. Fibre tools collapse. Plant-based technologies disappear without leaving outlines. A culture that builds with living materials leaves almost nothing behind once it moves on. Archaeology prefers stone, not because stone mattered more, but because stone refuses to vanish. Silence in this sense is biased. It selects against flexibility and rewards rigidity long after survival has moved elsewhere. Language itself disappears silently. Sounds leave no imprint. Grammar decays without speakers. Entire conceptual worlds die when the last voice capable of expressing them falls quiet. We know this even in recorded history where languages vanished despite writing. How much more complete was the loss when no writing existed at all? Silence here is not empty. It is crowded with erased meanings we will never recover, and yet silence is not random. Patterns emerge within it. Long periods of stability punctuated by sudden gaps. Regions where occupation stops abruptly, then resumes centuries later with no obvious continuity. These are not mysteries of ignorance alone. They are signatures of catastrophe. Volcanic winters, mega droughts, rapid climate shifts that forced populations to scatter or perish. When survivors regrouped, much was forgotten. silence also marks deliberate forgetting. Knowledge that becomes dangerous is sometimes abandoned. Practices that no longer fit new environments are allowed to fade. Memory is selective by necessity. To survive, humans often had to let go of what once worked. Silence then can be adaptive. It makes room for change even as it hides loss from future eyes. There is a temptation to imagine ancient humans as living in a continuous present, unburdened by history. But silence does not imply lack of reflection. The evidence we do find suggests deep awareness of cycles of birth and death, of return and disappearance. Burial practices, seasonal rituals, and alignment with celestial events all point toward minds attentive to time's passage, even when they left no written record of it. In my own work, silence often arrives late at night, after the instruments have finished recording, after the data has been logged, and the room grows still. There is a moment when explanation ends and acceptance begins, the realization that some things were never meant to survive beyond their moment, that not all knowledge seeks permanence, that some truths exist only to be lived, not preserved. Modern civilization struggles with this idea. We build to last. We archive obsessively. We equate durability with importance. But deep time suggests another metric. What survives is not always what mattered most. What mattered most was what kept people alive, connected and adaptable in worlds that refused stability. Silence conceals that truth precisely because it was carried in motion rather than monument. There is humility in recognizing how much has vanished. The missing years are not a gap to be filled, but a space to be respected. Each absence marks lives lived fully without regard for future recognition. People who loved, feared, learned, and taught without leaving anything durable enough to be excavated. Their silence is not failure, it is consequence. Even now, silence continues its work. Languages disappear, skills fade. Ecological knowledge is lost as environments change faster than memory can adapt. The process did not end with civilization, it accelerated. We are not outside the cycle. We are within it, subject to the same forces that erased those before us, only temporarily insulated by technology and scale. To sit with this silence is unsettling at first. It challenges the idea that progress is cumulative, that history moves steadily forward. It suggests instead that survival is episodic, that memory resets are inevitable, that forgetting is as fundamental as learning. And yet there is comfort here too. If forgetting is natural, then not knowing everything is not failure, it is condition. Silence also invites listening of a different kind, not for answers, but for resonance, for the faint alignment between ancient lives and our own. Long nights, uncertain futures, dependence on cooperation, the need to belong. These patterns persist even when records do not. They survive not as data, but as instinct. In the end, traveller silence does not demand interpretation. It asks only patience. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Others, tonight the universe whispers again. A forgotten epoch does not vanish all at once. It fades unevenly like a shoreline retreating under rising water, leaving scattered stones where villages once stood. In the long memory of Earth, entire ages of human life have slipped away without ceremony, not erased by violence alone, but by time's steady indifference. Traveller. This is the chapter where we stop searching for beginnings and begin acknowledging how often humanity has already ended. For hundreds of thousands of years, human existence unfolded in cycles measured not by calendars, but by climate. Ice advanced and withdrew. Grasslands replaced forest, then surrendered again. Rivers shifted, course dried, returned. Each cycle reshaped where people could live, what they could eat, and how knowledge was passed on. Stability was rare. Adaptation was everything. The forgotten epoch is not one era, but many layered failures and renewals stacked atop one another. In these deep stretches of time, progress did not accumulate the way modern narratives expect. Knowledge expanded, refined, and then collapsed when environments changed faster than memory could travel. A tool perfected for one climate became useless in another. A navigation route lost relevance when coastlines drowned. A medicinal plant vanished when rainfall patterns shifted. Each loss carried silence with it, not because humans forgot how to remember, but because survival demanded immediate response over preservation. Archaeology offers brief windows into these epochs. Stone tools appear, diversify, then simplify again. Settlement patterns emerge, disappear, and re-emerge elsewhere with no clear lineage. This is not evidence of regression. It is evidence of reset. Each generation rebuilt its understanding of the world from fragments inherited imperfectly. Civilization would later mistake this pattern for primitiveness. In reality, it was resilience under constraint. Some forgotten epochs may have come dangerously close to erasing our species entirely. Genetic bottlenecks suggest moments when human populations dwindled to a few thousand individuals worldwide. Not mythic catastrophes, but slow attrition through drought, cold, and scarcity. Survival depended less on innovation than on cooperation, less on domination than on restraint. Those who endured carried forward not records but instincts. In these epochs, humans were not passive victims of nature. They shaped landscapes, deliberately burning grasslands to encourage regrowth, guiding animal migrations, tending wild plants, without domesticating them fully. These practices left few permanent marks, but they altered ecosystems profoundly. The planet remembers even when we do not. Soil composition changes. Pollen records shift. Charcoal layers appear where fires were once carefully set. These are the quiet signatures of forgotten stewardship. The absence of monuments does not mean absence of meaning. Ritual likely thrived in these epochs, expressed through movement, song, and shared timing rather than fixed structures. Ceremonies aligned with solstices, migrations, and celestial cycles did not require temples to endure. They required participation. When participation ceased, nothing physical remained. Meaning dissolved back into time intact but inaccessible. Language evolved through these forgotten ages in ways we can barely infer. Concepts essential for survival were embedded in metaphor rhythm and story optimized for memory rather than precision. Instructions disguised as myth. Warnings woven into cosmology. A child did not learn ecology through abstraction, but through narrative repetition until the world itself felt readable. When those stories stopped being told, their worlds ended. One of the most unsettling implications of the forgotten epoch is this. Humanity may have reached levels of sophistication multiple times without crossing into civilization as we define it. Complexity does not guarantee permanence. Intelligence does not demand cities. For most of our existence, humans chose mobility over accumulation, flexibility over structure. Civilization required not brilliance alone, but an unusual pause in catastrophe, long enough to allow rigidity to form. From this perspective, civilization is not humanity's default state. It is a fragile experiment made possible by rare environmental calm. The forgotten epochs remind us that most human intelligence evolved without walls, without fields, without writing, and without hierarchy. What we call advancement may simply be one configuration among many, not the inevitable outcome of cognition. I have felt this realization settle during long nights, with ancient datasets spread across screens and tables, watching patterns refuse to align neatly. The temptation is always to force coherence to impose narrative where none survives. But deep time resists storytelling. It offers fragments and demands humility. Acceptance becomes part of the method. Not knowing becomes a form of respect. The forgotten epoch also reframes loss. What disappeared was not necessarily inferior. Much of it may have been exquisitely tuned to worlds that no longer exist. Knowledge optimized for one environment becomes useless in another. Forgetting then is not failure, but consequence. Evolution selects for adaptability, not memory. Even today we see echoes of this process. Traditional ecological knowledge vanishes when landscapes are altered too quickly. Skills that require decades of apprenticeship disappear within a generation of disruption. The forgotten epoch is not behind us. It is ongoing, repeating at accelerated speed under modern conditions. To acknowledge these epochs is to accept that humanity's story is not a straight ascent but a series of survivals interrupted by collapse. Each time something is carried forward. Each time much is lost. What remains is not the sum of all past knowledge, but what proved portable enough to endure. In the end, traveller, the forgotten epoch does not accuse us, it reminds us that being human has always meant living without guarantees, that memory is fragile, that resilience matters more than permanence. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. Reset is not destruction. It is continuation under altered rules. In the deep story of humanity, resets arrive without announcement, indifferent to intention, erasing continuity while preserving potential. Ice sheets advance, oceans rise, forests retreat, and what once sustained life becomes uninhabitable within a few generations. Traveller, this is the moment where the long experiment of adaptation reveals its most unsettling truth. Survival does not reward memory, it rewards flexibility. Across deep time, the planet has reset human possibilities again and again. Volcanic winters dimmed the sun for decades. Mega droughts emptied entire regions. Rapid warming dissolved ice barriers and redrew coastlines faster than stories could travel. Each reset shattered accumulated knowledge not through failure of intelligence but through failure of transmission. A skill not practiced dies. A route not walked fades. A language without speakers dissolves into silence. What survives a reset is rarely what was most impressive. Monuments crumble. Technologies dependent on specific environments fail. What endures are behaviours portable enough to move with bodies, cooperation, curiosity, pattern recognition, the ability to read change before it becomes fatal. These traits are not written in stone. They are etched into nervous systems shaped by repeated loss and renewal. Modern humans often imagine resets as endpoints, apocalypse as finality. But the archaeological record suggests something quieter. Resets compress humanity, distilling it down to essentials, stripping complexity until only what can be carried remains. Then expansion begins again, not as progress, but as reconfiguration. Civilization in this sense is not a triumph over resets. It is a pause between them. Evidence of reset appears everywhere once you know how to look. Settlement layers stacked atop one another, separated by sterile sediment. Tools abruptly changing form as resources vanish. Genetic bottlenecks narrowing diversity to a fragile thread. Each mark indicates not extinction, but survival under constraint. Humanity did not escape resets. It passed through them, repeatedly altered but continuous. This reframes catastrophe itself. Rather than aberration, catastrophe is structure. Climate instability is not the exception in Earth's history. Stability is. The long calm that allowed agriculture and cities to form is an anomaly against millions of years of oscillation. Civilization flourished during a rare window when the planet stopped shaking long enough for permanence to seem plausible. In earlier resets, humans responded by moving. Mobility was safety. Knowledge was light enough to travel. Camps dissolved before danger arrived. Social systems favoured sharing over hoarding because accumulation slowed escape. Hierarchy flattened because survival demanded consensus. These were not moral choices. They were mathematical solutions to instability. Reset also reshaped perception. Time was not linear. It was cyclical. Seasons returned. Animals migrated back. Fires renewed landscapes. Loss did not imply end. It implied return under different conditions. This worldview does not require optimism. It requires patience. Acceptance replaced control as the dominant survival strategy. I have felt the weight of reset in laboratories when climate models converge on thresholds already crossed, when projections echo patterns visible in deep time. The instruments are modern, but the story is old. Reset is not punishment, it is process. The planet does not remember us. It responds to physics, chemistry, and energy flows indifferent to narrative. This understanding unsettles modern confidence. We have built systems optimized for stability in a world defined by change. Our infrastructures assume continuity. Our knowledge systems assume accumulation. But deep history suggests accumulation is temporary, while adaptability is persistent. Resets do not ask whether we are advanced. They ask whether we can adjust. The most haunting aspect of reset is not what is lost, but what must be relearned. After each compression, humanity rebuilds understanding from fragments, often rediscovering principles once known. Fire management, seasonal movement, cooperative sharing, ecological restraint. These are not innovations, they are recoveries. Civilization tends to forget them first. There is no evidence that previous humans believed resets could be prevented. Instead, they prepared for them implicitly. They avoided overcommitment to place. They distributed knowledge across many minds. They accepted impermanence as baseline. This acceptance did not weaken them. It allowed survival across conditions that would overwhelm rigid systems. Reset also explains why so much ancient knowledge appears suddenly then vanishes. Innovation blossoms briefly when conditions allow, then disappears when environments shift. What remains to be excavated is not the full arc of capability but the residue left after collapse. We mistake residue for origin because it is all we can see. Even today, reset is underway in slow motion. Rising seas redraw coastlines. Ecosystems reorganize. Technologies obsolete themselves within decades. Knowledge accelerates beyond what can be carried intact. We are not exempt from the pattern. We are participating in it with more data and less memory than we imagine. To recognize reset is not to surrender. It is to recalibrate expectation. Humanity has never been defined by uninterrupted growth. It has been defined by survival through interruption. Each reset has narrowed possibility, and then reopened it in unexpected directions. What emerges afterward is not lesser humanity, but altered humanity. In the end, Traveller Reset is not an ending written in fire. It is a quiet subtraction followed by cautious addition. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. An echo is not the original sound. It is what remains after impact reshaped by distant surface and time. In the deep history of humanity, echoes are all we ever receive. Not voices, not intentions, not explanations, but faint repetitions carried forward through altered environments and altered minds. Traveller, this is where the story stops moving forward and begins to resonate backward, where the past is no longer gone but folded quietly into the present. Every human alive today carries echoes of lives lived long before memory learned how to write itself down. Not as images or stories, but as tendencies, instincts and reflexes that feel personal, yet arrive from nowhere. The comfort of firelight, the unease of isolation, the urge to watch the sky when the world feels uncertain. These are not cultural accidents. They are compressed survivals, signals preserved because they worked across resets. Echoes survive where structures fail. When camps vanished and coastlines drowned, patterns of cooperation endured. When languages dissolved, rhythm and gesture persisted. When knowledge systems collapsed, heuristics remained. If danger appears, gather together. If food is abundant, share. If seasons change, move. These principles required no writing. They required repetition across generations until they felt obvious, natural, unquestioned. Archaeology catches echoes imperfectly, a tool reused in a new context, a burial practice adapted to a different environment, a motif repeating across distant regions without direct contact. These similarities are not evidence of a single origin. They are evidence of convergent memory, different groups arriving at the same solutions because the constraints shaping them were the same. Gravity does not negotiate. Hunger does not innovate. Survival converges. Some echoes are embedded biologically. The stress response that sharpens attention in uncertainty. The bonding hormones that reward cooperation. The pattern recognition that finds meaning in noise. These systems evolved not for comfort but for endurance. In small bands under unpredictable skies, these traits saved lives. Today they operate in environments that confuse them, but their origin remains intact, quietly shaping behavior beneath awareness. Other echoes live in myth. Stories of floods, fires, great cold, sky beings, lost lands. These narratives appear across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. Modern analysis often dismisses them as coincidence or imagination, but deep time suggests another possibility. Myths may be, Memories, distorted by transmission but anchored to real disruptions experienced repeatedly. When explanation failed, meaning stepped in. An echo does not preserve detail, it preserves significance. A flood story does not describe water levels accurately. It preserves the lesson that water rises and erases. A skyfire myth does not explain volcanism or impact events. It preserves the warning that the sky itself can become hostile. Precision decays, pattern remains. In this way, myth functions as survival data stored in emotional form. I have felt echoes surface unexpectedly during long nights of analysis, when modern graphs begin to resemble ancient cycles, when projections align with pollen records and ice cores telling the same story from different angles. The language changes, the insight does not. Humanity has been here before, watching familiar systems unravel, adapting, without understanding why the world shifted, only that it had. Echoes also shape our relationship with place. Many modern humans feel an unarticulated pull toward open landscapes, water edges, elevated views. These preferences are not aesthetic alone, they reflect survival advantages encoded long ago. Visibility reduces threat. Water increases resilience. Elevation offers foresight. Even in cities, these instincts persist, guiding desire without explanation. Civilization attempts to overwrite echoes with convenience and control, but it never fully succeeds. When systems fail, echoes reassert themselves quickly. People gather, they share, they improvise. Hierarchies flatten temporarily. The old patterns surface because they are still there, waiting beneath layers of habit. Echoes do not need to be taught. They emerge under pressure. This persistence complicates the narrative of progress. If echoes remain intact across resets, then history is not a clean break from the past, but an accumulation of habits layered over ancient responses. Modern behavior is not separate from prehistory. It is prehistory operating in unfamiliar conditions. When anxiety spikes, when community is sought, when meaning is questioned, echoes are speaking. There is humility in recognizing this continuity. It dissolves the illusion that we are fundamentally different from those who lived tens of thousands of years ago. Our tools shine brighter, our reach extends farther. But the mind interpreting the world remains ancient. The questions persist. How do we survive? How do we belong? How do we endure change without losing ourselves? Echoes also warn us. They remind us that systems built too rigidly fracture under stress, that over-extraction invites collapse, that ignoring cycles invites surprise. These lessons were learned repeatedly at high cost, encoded not in treaties or textbooks, but in behavior and belief. When echoes are ignored, they do not vanish. They return amplified. The deep past is not silent because it has nothing to say. It is silent because it speaks in frequencies we rarely attend to. Genetics, instinct, pattern, emotion. These are slower languages resistant to translation but remarkably durable. They survive when libraries burn and networks fail. They whisper rather than declare. Even now, as humanity accelerates toward uncertain thresholds, echoes continue their quiet work. They manifest as discomfort, with excess longing for simplicity, unease, with disconnection from land and sky. These feelings are often dismissed as nostalgia or weakness. In reality, they are signals generated by systems calibrated for a different scale of living. To listen to echoes is not to reject modernity. It is to contextualize it. To understand that our current configuration is not permanent, not guaranteed, not exempt from the forces that shaped everything before it. Echoes do not predict specific futures. They prepare minds to adapt when futures arrive, uninvited. In the end, traveller echoes are neither warnings nor instructions. They are reminders that we have endured before, that we carry more than we remember consciously, that beneath complexity lies a resilient core shaped by countless nights of survival. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. A pattern is what remains when chaos repeats long enough to leave a trace. It is not intention, not design, but memory expressed through structure. In the long human story, patterns are the quiet language spoken between extinction and survival. Traveller, This is where the scattered fragments begin to align not into certainty but into recognition, the sense that something familiar has been happening again and again beneath different skies. From a distance, human history looks like progress. Tools improve, populations grow, settlements expand, knowledge accumulates, but deep time refuses that simple reading. When viewed across tens of thousands of years, a different pattern emerges. Expansion followed by contraction, complexity followed by simplification, memory followed by forgetting. The cycle does not ask permission. It unfolds whether or not it is understood. Climate is the first pattern. Ice ages arrive slowly, then retreat unevenly. Warm periods bloom briefly, then destabilize. Rain belts shift. Deserts appear where rivers once ran. Each climatic turn redraws the map of what is possible for humans. Migration routes open and close. Food sources vanish and reappear elsewhere. Cultures that adapt survive. Those that cannot dissolve into silence. The planet sets the rhythm. Humanity learns to dance or stumbles. Within these environmental patterns, social patterns repeat. Small groups flourish under scarcity, relying on cooperation and shared knowledge. When resources concentrate, groups grow larger, hierarchy emerges, and inequality follows. Surplus enables specialization, but also fragility. Systems optimize for abundance struggle when abundance fades. Again and again, history shows the same arc growth strain. Fracture, reorganization. Technology follows a similar rhythm. Innovation accelerates. Under pressure, stabilizes when conditions allow, then becomes obsolete when environments shift. Tools are abandoned not because they fail, but because the world they were built for disappears. Stone replaces wood. Bone replaces fiber. Metal replaces stone. Each transition looks like progress, but it is also adaptation to new constraints. No tool is permanent, only usefulness endures. Knowledge transmission reveals one of the most fragile patterns. Information survives best when shared widely and practiced often. When knowledge concentrates in specialists or institutions, it becomes efficient but vulnerable. If the structure collapses, the knowledge collapses with it. Hunter-gatherer systems distributed memory across many minds. Civilization centralized it. Both approaches have strengths. Both fail under different conditions. There is a pattern in how humans respond to uncertainty. When the future feels unstable, attention turns upward, to stars, to cycles, to forces larger than individual control. Astronomy, myth, religion, and science are not separate impulses. They're different expressions of the same need to locate oneself within a vast, indifferent universe. The pattern is not belief, it is orientation. Even art follows repetition. Cave paintings disappear, then reappear across continents separated by millennia. Handprints, animals in motion, abstract symbols. These are not random decorations. They recur because they serve a purpose. To say I am here, to bind individuals into a shared experience, to anchor memory in place when nothing else remains. Art is not luxury. It is pattern recognition made visible. Violence, too, follows pattern. It increases when resources shrink, when groups compete over shrinking territory. It decreases when cooperation becomes more efficient than conflict. There is no linear moral arc bending inevitably toward peace. There is responsiveness. Humans behave differently under different constraints. The pattern is not good or evil. It is conditional. Modern narratives often frame history as lessons learned once and for all. Deep time disagrees. Lessons must be relearned repeatedly because conditions change faster than memory travels. Each generation encounters familiar challenges under new circumstances, believing them unprecedented. The pattern is forgetting followed by rediscovery, hubris followed by humility. I have watched this pattern emerge in data that spans thousands of years, layers of sediment telling the same story in different languages. Ice cores record abrupt temperature spikes. Pollen records show forests advancing and retreating. Charcoal layers mark periods of intense fire. Human presence tracks these shifts closely, retreating, advancing, adapting. The pattern is undeniable once seen. There is a temptation to see pattern as fate, as inevitability. But patterns do not remove agency. They define boundaries within which choice operates. Humans cannot stop ice ages. They can choose how to respond. They cannot prevent climate from changing. They can decide whether to cooperate or fragment, to share or hoard, to listen to warning signs or ignore them. One of the most persistent patterns is denial. Each time conditions begin to shift, those most invested in stability resist acknowledgement. Change threatens structures built for permanence. Evidence is dismissed. Signals are minimized. By the time adaptation becomes unavoidable, options have narrowed. This pattern appears in ancient collapses and modern crises alike. The human mind prefers continuity even when continuity is no longer possible. Yet alongside denial exists another pattern: resilience. Even after severe collapse, humans regroup. Small groups form. Knowledge is rebuilt. Stories adapt. The species does not require perfection to persist. It requires just enough cooperation, just enough flexibility, just enough memory carried forward to begin again. This has happened more times than we can count. Patterns do not promise safety. They promise context. To see them is to understand that current challenges are not aberrations, but expressions of long-running dynamics. That realization can be unsettling, but it can also be grounding. It replaces panic with perspective, fear with preparation. When we look at the missing hundreds of thousands of years through this lens, they no longer appear empty. They appear patterned, repetition without record, experimentation without archive, humanity refining itself not toward a single outcome but toward survivability across changing worlds. In the end, traveller patterns do not tell us what will happen next. They tell us what tends to happen. They whisper probabilities, not prophecies. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. A warning does not arrive as an order. It arrives as a pattern, repeated often enough to become impossible to ignore. In the deep history of humanity, warnings were rarely spoken directly. They were embedded in stories encoded in habits, and etched into landscapes through loss. Traveller. This is where the long memory of the species leans forward, not to frighten but to remind, quietly, patiently, without urgency. Every civilization that has ever risen believed at least briefly that it was different, more advanced, more stable, more protected from the forces that erase those before it. The warning is that this belief itself is ancient and it has never been rewarded. Complexity increases efficiency, but it also increases dependency. The more intricate a system becomes, the more fragile it is to disruption. This is not ideology, it is physics. In the archaeological record, collapse rarely announces itself as collapse. It appears first as strain. Crop yields narrow, diets simplify. Bones show signs of malnutrition. Infrastructure expands faster than maintenance. Inequality grows quietly, then visibly. The warning signs are subtle, easily rationalized, easily dismissed by those who benefit most from stability. By the time collapse becomes undeniable, adaptation options have already narrowed. Climate has always been the primary messenger of warning. Shifts in rainfall, longer dry seasons, colder winters, hotter summers. These changes rarely destroy societies outright. They stress them unevenly, exposing weaknesses in distribution governance and cooperation. Civilizations that respond by tightening control often accelerate their own failure. Those that adapt through flexibility endure longer, but none endure forever. Deep Time reveals a consistent warning about scale. Systems optimized for growth struggle with limits. Hunter-gatherer societies operated within feedback loops they could perceive directly. Overuse a place, and the consequences arrived quickly. Civilization delays feedback through storage trade and abstraction. Consequences arrive later, amplified and harder to trace to their origin. The warning is not that limits exist, but that delayed limits are more dangerous. Another warning emerges from knowledge itself. When understanding becomes specialized and siloed, it advances rapidly but loses redundancy. If only a few understand how a system works, its failure becomes catastrophic. Distributed knowledge is slower but resilient. Deep history favors redundancy over efficiency. Modern systems favor efficiency over redundancy. The warning is structural, not moral. there is also a warning embedded in how humans relate to land. For most of our existence, land was partner, not property. Use was negotiated through movement and restraint. Civilization reframed land as static, ownable, extractable. This reframing enabled abundance, but it also severed feedback between use and consequence. When land is exhausted, the response becomes expansion rather than adjustment. History shows this pattern, repeating until expansion fails. Violence carries its own warning. Warfare scales with organization. Small groups fight episodically. Large systems mobilize continuously. As societies grow, conflict becomes less personal and more abstract, easier to justify, harder to stop. Resources diverted to war weaken resilience elsewhere. The warning is not that violence exists, but that industrialized violence destabilizes everything it touches, including those who wield it. Warnings also surface in mythic form. Stories of great floods, fallen golden ages, punished arrogance, and lost harmony are not fantasies divorced from reality. They are compressed memories of imbalance and correction. Myth preserves emotional truth, where factual detail decays. The repetition of these stories across cultures is itself a warning passed forward because it mattered. I have encountered warnings not as proclamations but as alignments. Datasets from different fields converging unexpectedly. Climate models echoing ancient sediment layers. Social stress indicators mirroring patterns seen before documented collapses. In those moments, the future feels less unknown and more familiar. Not predetermined but constrained by history's long shadow. One of the most difficult warnings to accept is this. Intelligence does not protect against collapse. Knowledge does not guarantee wisdom. Awareness does not ensure action. Many civilizations fell not because they lacked understanding, but because understanding arrived too late or conflicted with entrenched interests. The mind can see danger and still choose continuity. There is also a warning about speed. Change that arrives gradually allows adaptation. Change that accelerates overwhelms systems designed for stability. Deep history is filled with gradual shifts punctuated by rapid events. Those rapid events do not allow learning. They demand response with whatever capacity exists at that moment. Preparation matters more than prediction. Modern humanity stands within multiple accelerating changes simultaneously. Climate, technology, population, information. Each interacts with the others, amplifying uncertainty. This does not make the present unique, but it does make it dense. The warning is not that collapse is imminent, but that thresholds are real and crossing them alters options permanently. Yet warnings are not prophecies. They do not declare inevitable outcomes. They indicate risk. They invite adjustment. Deep time shows that humans are capable of remarkable resilience when cooperation overrides competition, when short-term gain yields to long-term survival, when systems are redesigned rather than defended blindly. The most hopeful warning may be this. Humanity has survived worse conditions than those it now faces. Ice ages, near extinctions, volcanic winters. But survival was achieved not through domination, but through humility, flexibility, and shared knowledge. Those traits remain available. They have not been bred out. They wait beneath habits reinforced by stability. To listen to warning is uncomfortable. It disrupts narratives of control. It demands patience rather than certainty. But ignoring warning has never preserved civilization. Deep time offers no example where denial succeeded. It offers many where acknowledgement arrived too late. In the end, traveller warning is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to situate you within a longer story where consequence follows, pattern not intent. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. The sky has always been the first archive humanity learned to read. Long before marks were pressed into clay or ink flowed across paper, the movements above carried order, repetition, and warning. Traveller, when the ground was uncertain and the future unreadable, people lifted their eyes upward not for comfort alone but for structure. The sky offered patterns when the earth refused stability. Every human culture that ever existed looked upward and saw meaning, not because meaning was projected carelessly, but because the sky is the largest stable system visible to a fragile species. Mountains erode, rivers change course, forests burn and regrow, but stars return night after night with precision that feels intentional. In a world defined by change, the sky appeared reliable, almost eternal. For early humans, the sky was not separate from survival. It was calendar, compass, and clock. The rising of certain stars signalled migrations, rains cold, or abundance. Lunar cycles regulated hunting, gathering, and reproduction. The sun marked time not abstractly but physically through shadows that lengthened and shortened across familiar ground. Knowledge of the sky was not curiosity, it was infrastructure. This intimacy with the sky left a few physical traces. You cannot excavate starlight. You infer it indirectly through alignments, seasonal camps, migration timing, and oral traditions that preserve celestial memory disguised as myth. When stones align with solstices across continents separated by thousands of years, coincidence becomes unlikely. The sky was being watched carefully, systematically, patiently. Astronomy did not begin with civilization. Civilization formalized it. Long before temples and observatories, humans noticed regularity and encoded it in story. Constellations were not decorations. They were mnemonic devices, maps projected onto darkness to make memory portable. A hunter could carry the sky anywhere. It required no tools, no materials, no permanence. The sky also offered humility. It reminded humans of scale, of forces beyond control, of cycles indifferent to desire. This perspective shaped worldview profoundly. Life on Earth felt embedded within something vast, older, and incomprehensible. Death did not appear as final annihilation, but as return to a larger system that continued regardless of individual absence. In moments of catastrophe, the sky became witness. Volcanic eruptions dimmed sunlight for years. Meteors flared briefly and vanished. Auroras danced during solar storms that disrupted climates and migration patterns. These events entered memory not as data, but as story. Sky fire, angry gods, shifting heavens. Language struggled to contain experience, but the impression endured. I have sat alone beneath modern skies, instruments humming softly beside me, recording radiation, temperature, light intensity, while feeling an older awareness rise beneath training. Data flows across screens, but the instinct remains the same. Watch, measure, wait. The sky still invites patience. It still rewards attention. It still resists control. One of the deepest continuities between ancient humans and ourselves is this upward gaze during uncertainty. When systems strain, people look to the sky again, for meaning, for reassurance, for orientation. Even now, satellites trace invisible paths overhead, and weather patterns dictate futures beyond politics or intention. The sky remains indifferent, precise, and quietly dominant. Civilization attempted to domesticate the sky through calendars, astrology, and later astronomy. These efforts were not about dominance, they were about prediction. To know when floods might come, when planting would succeed, when travel was safe, prediction reduced anxiety, control was illusion, respect was survival. The sky also preserved memory through absence. When stars disappeared behind clouds for too long, famine followed. When seasons arrived, late or early confusion spread. These disruptions were noted carefully. A change in the sky often preceded change on the ground. Attention upward became early warning. Across the missing hundreds of thousands of years, this relationship endured. Even as tools changed, even as languages shifted, the sky remained a constant reference point. It bound humanity together across resets, a shared ceiling under which different worlds rose and fell. Today, light pollution hides much of that archive. Many modern humans live beneath skies stripped of depth, reduced to glow, yet the pull remains. Ore surfaces unexpectedly under dark skies far from cities, a feeling of familiarity without explanation, recognition without memory. The sky still speaks to something ancient within us. Scientific understanding has expanded that conversation rather than ending it. We now know stars are nuclear furnaces. That light carries information across billions of years. That cosmic radiation whispers stories older than Earth itself. The sky did not lose meaning when myth gave way to physics. It gained layers. The realization that the atoms in our bodies were forged in stars reframes ancient intuition. The sky is not separate. It is origin. The ancestors who watched constellations could not articulate this scientifically, but their reverence was not misplaced. They sensed continuity where data now confirms it. When we consider the missing years, the sky offers a through line. While camps dissolved and knowledge vanished, the ski persisted, recording time in motion. Humans learned to synchronize with it. The synchronization may be one of the deepest survival technologies we ever developed. In the end, Traveller of the Sky does not judge our civilizations. It outlasts them. It offers pattern without promise, beauty without guarantee. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight, the universe whispers again. Earth remembers everything, but it speaks slowly and without ceremony. Long before names, borders, or calendars, this planet learned to store memory without language or intention. Layers of sediment trapped air, magnetic scars, and shifting plates hold histories no archive could contain. To walk across Earth is to cross an immense library written in pressure, heat erosion, and time. Listener, the ground beneath you is not passive and never has been, but thinking patiently across ages. Its memory is vast, impersonal, and older than any question humans have ever dared to ask about existence itself and survival within its silence. During the missing 100,000 years, humans lived inside this remembering world rather than above it. They did not imagine ownership, permanence, or dominance, only participation and movement. Rivers shifted and people shifted with them. Coastlines drowned and people retreated inland. Earth never promised stability, and survival depended on reading change before it became disaster. Mobility was intelligence, flexibility was safety, and memory lived not in monuments but in bodies, habits, and stories. Repeated until they shaped instinct itself across generations, facing fire, drought, cold, and loss without complaint, certainty or illusion of control or destiny beyond survival itself alone. Geology offers no comfort narratives. Mountains rise and vanish without witnesses. Seas erase plains that once held camps, hearths, and footsteps. Entire human worlds dissolved beneath water silt and forest regrowth. What feels like loss to us is simply transition to Earth, an editing process that removes detail while preserving pattern. Erosion is not destruction, but time thinking slowly and honestly. Absence does not mean nothing happened, only that materials chosen were compatible with cycles longer than remembrance language or pride, leaving chemistry, shadow, and altered soil as the final record of presence long past memory or naming by descendants. Archaeology glimpses this dialogue faintly. A darker stain in soil, a healed fracture in bone, pigment carried far beyond its source. These are not primitive signs. They are evidence of planning, care, and foresight practiced in landscapes that rarely forgave mistakes. I've stood where nothing remains but altered sediment, where a shelter once breathed warmth into night. Earth remembered chemically what humanity forgot culturally, and that quiet persistence unsettles modern confidence in permanence, progress, and control. Reminding us how easily meaning dissolves when materials yield to moisture pressure, roots and centuries without ceremony, apology or acknowledgement from time itself. The idea of permanence arrived late. Walls, fields, calendars, and writing were strategies against uncertainty. Civilization learned to say, stay, repeat, endure. Earth responded with floods, tremors, and shifting climates. The conversation never ended, it only grew louder. During the long pre-civilized epoch, humans understood impermanence intuitively. Camps vanished by design tools, travelled easily, and knowledge moved through mouths and memory rather than structures. To stay too long was a risk, to move was wisdom, earned through loss, adaptation, and patient observation of Earth's moods, rhythms, warnings, and recoveries that repeated without malice, intention, or negotiation, beyond survival, attention, and humility. Catastrophe was not exception, but rhythm. Ice advanced and retreated. Rain failed, then returned. Populations contracted, scattered, reformed. Humanity survived by remaining flexible, social and observant. The record we inherit is survival, not triumph. Each reset erased technologies that took generations to refine. Knowledge lived in people, not things, and when people died, libraries burned silently. Cooperation mattered more than dominance, empathy more than force, and memory more than speed. These traits left little trace, yet they carried our species through bottlenecks, winters, droughts, and migrations that would have ended less patient, less social, less attentive creatures without record or praise. What survives best is what resists movement. Stone endures, wood dissolves. This distorts memory. Civilizations that collapsed quickly left more remains than lifeways that balanced quietly with Earth. Visibility is not success, it is stubbornness. The missing centuries were not empty, but efficient, sustainable and deeply informed by place. Organic technologies vanished precisely because they belonged to cycles rather than monuments. What we call progress often marks the moment we stopped listening carefully and began insisting loudly, building heavier footprints that Earth must now answer through correction, not cruelty, but balance restored by time pressure and consequence unfolding slowly again. Modern science is rediscovering ancient lessons, resilience, sustainability, adaptation. New terms for old knowledge. Our scale, however, is unprecedented. Earth responds faster now because pressure increased. Feedback loops tighten, silence becomes signal. I have watched instruments hum through the night, measuring changes too slow for intuition. The data echoes what ancestors knew without graphs. Stability is temporary, and systems fail when pushed beyond recovery. Listening early matters. Humility is adaptive. Confidence without attention invites collapse disguised as surprise as shock, or inevitability imposed by physics rather than intention, morality, or fate written anywhere, except Earth's long memory waiting to respond again. Earth does not need us. We need Earth. This imbalance defines reality. Species vanish without ceremony. Humans survive by remaining small long enough. That balance shifted recently. The question is whether it can return. Ancient nights were quiet, allowing Earth signals to speak clearly. Wind, water animals, and ground offered information survival required. Today, noise fills that space, but Earth still communicates through storms, shifting seasons, and exhausted soils. Attention remains the price of belonging here, not dominance, extraction, or entitlement mistaken for destiny earned by speed scale, or technology, divorced from limits, memory, or restraint learned painfully before writing. The missing years were a dialogue, not a void. Humans adapted through cooperation, memory, and care. Earth tested, humanity adjusted. That conversation continues now. Listener, the ground beneath you still remembers. It remembers footsteps, fires, failures, and patience. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Silence is the universe thinking. You are not lost here, only briefly awake within a story older than words, older than walls. And tonight Earth holds you as it always has, asking nothing but attention, humility, and rest. As time continues, its slow remembering beneath sleep, breath, and darkness without judgment or end. Return is not a movement through space, but through attention. After travelling across vanished coasts, buried camps, and silent epochs, the journey bends inward. Listener, this is the moment where deep time folds back into the present, where what was learned without words begins to surface quietly inside you. Return does not mean forgetting the past. It means carrying it differently, lighter, without the need to own it or explain it fully. For most of human existence, returning was a daily act. Bands left familiar valleys, followed migrations, crossed rivers, then came back seasons later to landscapes both changed and recognizable. Memory was not fixed to place, but to pattern. A bend in a river, a stand of trees, a ridge that caught wind just right. Return required noticing what stayed and what shifted, and adjusting without resentment or nostalgia. Modern life rarely allows this kind of return. We move forward relentlessly, mistaking motion for progress. Yet the nervous system you carry was shaped by cycles, not lines. Sleep itself is a return. Darkness brings the body back to rhythms older than cities. Breath slows, muscles loosen. Awareness drifts from edges towards center. This is not escape, it is calibration. I have felt this most strongly after long nights of research when data begins to blur and the mind resists answers. Stepping outside away from instruments and screens, the Skeph restores proportion. Stars erase urgency. Wind reminds the body that it belongs to systems far larger than schedules or explanations. Return begins when the demand to know loosens into the ability to observe without tension. The missing centuries teach this gently. They show that intelligence is not constant activity but timing. Ancient humans returned to places only when conditions allowed. They rested when movement was dangerous. They waited without shame. Waiting was not failure. It was strategy learned through loss. In those pauses, knowledge deepened, stories sharpened, bonds strengthened. Return also means carrying forward what endured. Cooperation survived every collapse. Storytelling outlasted every tool. Empathy persisted through bottlenecks that nearly erased the species. These are not soft traits. They are survival technologies refined under pressure. You feel them now as longing for connection, for shared silence, for meaning that does not require constant justification. Civilization trained us to externalize memory. We store knowledge in devices, archives, networks. Useful but incomplete. The older system stored memory in bodies and relationships. Skills passed hand to hand, voice to ear. Return does not reject modern tools. It balances them with embodied knowing. Attention returns to breath, posture, tone, presence. These were once essential data streams. There is no single destination in this return. It is not a retreat to caves or forests. It is a reorientation, listening more than asserting, noticing limits without panic, accepting uncertainty as information rather than threat. The ancestors lived without guarantees. They learned to be comfortable inside questions. That comfort is still available, though rarely practiced. When you lie awake at night, thoughts circling without resolution, that restlessness is ancient. It once scanned darkness for predators and weather. Today it scans futures. Return asks not to silence it, but to soften it. To remind the mind that vigilance has limits, that rest is also productive. Sleep was once communal, protected, shared. Even alone, your body remembers how to descend. The planet participates in this return. Earth cycles do not hurry. Dawn follows night without negotiation. Tides rise and fall regardless of attention. Aligning with these rhythms reduces friction. The missing years were long because they moved at planetary speed, not human impatience. Returning to that tempo calms systems strained by acceleration. I think often of the quiet confidence ancient people must have carried. Not certainty, but familiarity with change. They expected loss and renewal in equal measure. When a place no longer fed them, they left. When conditions improved, they returned. This flexibility preserved them. Rigidity would have ended them. Return also reframes progress. Instead of asking what comes next, it asks what endures. Skills that survive disruption matter more than conveniences that collapse under stress. Relationships outlast infrastructure. Trust moves faster than transport. Memory travels farther than stone. These truths surface repeatedly when systems fail. As this journey turns back toward the present, there is no final lesson to extract. Only alignment to restore. You are not required to solve the past. You are invited to feel it informing the present quietly. The missing years are not behind you. They live in reflex, instinct, comfort with darkness, and the way your body exhales when vigilance finally loosens. Return is gentle. It does not announce itself. It happens when attention settles, when the mind releases the need to be exceptional, productive, or certain, when breath deepens without instruction, when sleep approaches not as escape, but as continuation of a cycle older than language. You're not stepping backward. You're stepping into scale. Carry what remains useful. Release what demands constant effort. The ancestors did this repeatedly. It kept them alive. It can steady you now. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. You're not lost in time. You're returning to rhythm. Tonight, that is enough. Reflection begins when motion slows enough for meaning to surface without force. After walking through Vanished coasts, forgotten camps, and the long quiet. Before writing, the mind naturally turns inward. Listener. This is not analysis, not conclusion, but a pause where what has been witnessed settles gently into awareness. Reflection is the human ability to hold complexity without needing to resolve it. A skill older than philosophy, older than science, refined through countless nights beside fires where answers were less important than continuity. For most of human existence, reflection was inseparable from survival. Decisions were not abstract. They shaped whether children lived, whether groups endured winter, whether memory passed forward. Reflection happened in silence, in watching weather shift, in noticing how animals behaved before storms. It required patience and humility. Overconfidence killed, attentiveness preserved. These instincts shape the nervous system you carry even now as you listen, and feel something quiet align inside you. Modern life often treats reflection as luxury, something postponed until productivity is complete. But the deep past suggests the opposite. Reflection was maintenance. Without it, patterns were missed, mistakes, repeated disasters misunderstood. Ancient people reflected constantly, though not in words. They reflected through ritual, repetition, and story. Stories encoded lessons. Ritual slowed time. Repetition stabilized memory. None of this was decorative. It was functional intelligence. The missing centuries reveal how little is required for meaning. Without monuments or records, humans still marked time-honored loss, celebrated survival. Reflection lived in gesture, rhythm, and shared silence. These practices left few artifacts, but they shaped behavior profoundly. Cooperation, restraint, and empathy were reinforced not through law, but through narrative and example. Reflection ensured cohesion without hierarchy. I think about how different reflection feels today. It is often solitary, internal, disconnected from community, yet the impulse is the same. When your thoughts circle at night, replaying moments, imagining futures, that is reflection seeking space. It once prepared people for danger. Now it searches for coherence in noise. The mechanism did not change, the environment did. The long view invites gentleness toward this process. Reflection does not demand answers, it offers orientation. Looking back across 100,000 years, it becomes clear that certainty was never the human advantage. Adaptability was. Reflection sharpened adaptability by allowing people to notice when old strategies no longer fit new conditions. It made change survivable. Reflection also tempers ego. When you realize that almost everything defining modern identity occupies a thin slice of time, urgency softens. Success status and permanence shrink against geological scale. This does not make them meaningless, but contextual. Reflection places personal struggle inside a lineage that endured far worse without abandoning curiosity, care, or imagination. The ancestors reflected through art long before writing. Cave paintings were not decoration. They were thought made visible. They externalized memory, fear, hope, and wonder. They slowed time by anchoring experience in place. Reflection required effort. Paint carried deep into caves. Light tended carefully. This was intentional stillness. Reflection also accompanied loss. Death was constant. Grief required expression or it fractured groups. Burial rituals, even simple ones, gave shape to absence. Reflection allowed pain to be shared and transformed into continuity. This emotional intelligence mattered as much as technical skill. Groups that reflected together stayed together. In the modern world, reflection often feels disconnected from action. But in deep time, reflection guided action directly. It informed when to move, when to stay, when to risk, when to conserve. There was no separation between thinking and doing. Reflection happened while walking, hunting, gathering, waiting. It was integrated. This integration is still available. When you notice how your body responds to quiet, to darkness, to slow breathing, that is ancient reflection resurfacing. It is not regression. It is calibration. The nervous system adjusting to signals it recognizes as safe and familiar. Scientific reflection mirrors this process. Hypotheses pause before conclusion. Data accumulates slowly. Uncertainty remains visible. The most honest science accepts limits. This humility echoes ancient reflection. Knowing when not to know preserved both inquiry and survival. The missing years remind us that reflection thrives without external validation. No audience was required, no legacy ensured. Meaning existed because life continued. This challenges modern anxiety about impact. Reflection suggests that participation itself is enough. Being part of a long story matters more than being remembered within it. As this journey nears its quiet descent, reflection gathers what remains useful. Curiosity without haste, attention without fear, acceptance without resignation. These qualities sustained humanity through ice ages and droughts. They can steady you now. Reflection does not erase modern complexity. It softens its edges. When faced with overwhelming information, reflection filters signal from noise. It asks not what demands reaction, but what deserves care. This discernment was once essential. It still is. I imagine ancient nights ending much like this one. Fires dimming, stories trailing off, people settling into shared sleep, reflection fading into rest. Not everything resolved, not everything understood. Enough held to continue. Listener, you are allowed this incompleteness. The deep past does not demand mastery. It offers perspective. Reflection is how that perspective integrates gently without force. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Silence is the universe thinking. Tonight reflection has done its work. You can let it dissolve into rest, knowing that understanding is not required for belonging, and that you remain part of a lineage that reflected its way through darkness, uncertainty, and change, and survived. Descent is not collapse, not disappearance, but a gradual surrender to gravity, rhythm, and trust. After reflection has softened the edges of thought the mind no longer needs to hold the entire arc of human history at once. Listener, this is the moment where vigilance loosens and awareness sinks gently, like sediment settling after a long disturbance. Descent is an ancient skill practiced nightly, long before beds, roofs, or clocks divided darkness into obligations. It is the body remembering how to rest without explanation. For most of the missing ages, sleep was not an isolated act. It happened in groups beneath open skies or shallow shelters accompanied by breath fire and distant animal sounds. Falling asleep meant trusting the world enough to release attention. That trust was earned slowly through shared watchfulness. Someone always remained half awake, others drifted deeper. Descent was collective, layered, and protective. Modern sleep is often solitary and strained. Minds resist descent because they mistake stillness for vulnerability. Yet, the nervous system you carry was shaped by countless successful nights of rest in far harsher conditions. Darkness did not mean danger alone. It meant renewal, growth, repair, memory consolidation before memory had a name. Descent was essential technology. I have noticed this in my own long nights when analysis reaches a limit and data refuses clarity. There comes a moment when pushing harder yields nothing but noise. Only by stepping back, dimming light, and allowing descent does understanding reorganize itself. Sleep completes thought in ways waking effort cannot. This was true for the ancestors as well. The deep past teaches that descent is not passive. It is active participation in cycles larger than will. The earth cools at night. Animals rest. Plants reset chemical processes. Humans once aligned with this rhythm naturally. Fire dimmed. Stories slowed. Eyes closed. The body synchronized with planetary rotation without instruction. As civilization grew, descent became negotiated. Artificial light extended day. Schedules compressed night. Sleep fragmented. Yet the need never vanished. It only became harder to satisfy. The ancient blueprint still runs quietly beneath habit and expectation, waiting for conditions it recognizes. Descent now asks for permission rather than force. You cannot command it. You invite it by reducing stimulation, by softening breath, by allowing thoughts to drift without pursuit. This mirrors how ancient people entered sleep. There were no alarms, no deadlines attached to dawn. Waking followed rest organically guided by light and hunger. The missing centuries were rich in this rhythm. Without agriculture's fixed cycles, time flowed unevenly. Some nights were long and cold, others short and warm. Sleep adapted. Flexibility preserved energy. Descent responded to environment rather than schedule. This adaptability remains coded in your biology. As attention narrows, images from the journey blur. Ice sheets retreat into abstraction. Camps fade. Voices quiet. What remains is sensation. Weight of the body. Slow expansion of the chest. The gentle pull downward, not as falling, but as being held. Gravity as memory guiding matter back to rest. Descent also releases responsibility. The ancestors did not carry tomorrow alone. Survival was shared. Sleep trusted that others would watch that systems larger than individuals continued. Modern isolation makes descent feel risky, yet nothing in your immediate environment demands constant alertness. Recognizing this allows muscles to unclench jaw, to soften thoughts, to lengthen and dissolve. Scientific understanding supports this surrender. Sleep recalibrates neural networks. Hormones shift. Cells repair. Memory integrates. None of this requires conscious effort. The body knows what to do when allowed. The deep past confirms this reliability. Humans survived precisely because sleep worked. The descent into sleep mirrors descent into deep time. Both require letting go of urgency. Both replace linear thinking with layered awareness. In sleep, moments overlap. Past and future loosen their grip. This resembles how ancestors experienced time not as strict sequence, but as pattern and return. As you descend, it may feel like drifting backward. This is illusion. You're not regressing. You're aligning with foundational processes. Sleep is not escape from reality. It is maintenance of participation within it. Without descent, nothing endures. I imagine ancient camps quieting now. Fires reduced to embers. Bodies arranged close. The sky turning slowly. Stars shifting imperceptibly. Somewhere an animal moves. Somewhere wind passes through grass. The world continues without supervision. Trust deepens. Your descent belongs to this same continuity. Different roof. Different sounds. Same physiology. Same need. Same outcome. You're not alone in this motion. Every living thing on this planet participates in cycles of rest and renewal. Thoughts may still arise. Let them. They do not require response. They will pass like weather. Attention can rest beneath them deeper, quieter. The descent continues whether you monitor it or not. This is where the journey gently releases you. No final lesson, no conclusion to memorize, only the recognition that rest itself is knowledge. That letting go is a skill learned long before civilization practiced nightly by countless ancestors who trusted the dark enough to sleep. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Silence is the universe thinking. Sleep traveler. The cosmos will keep watch. Final does not mean an ending carved into stone. It means settling like dust after a long disturbance, like water after waves, have crossed an ocean and finally come to rest. Listener, this is the moment when the journey no longer needs to move forward, when it releases its momentum and allows you to exist quietly inside it. Nothing more is required from you now. You have arrived not at a conclusion, but at equilibrium. For almost all of human existence, there was no sense of history progressing toward a goal. There were no chapters, no eras, no belief that life was climbing toward something better or more complete. There was only continuity. Nights followed days, seasons returned. Children grew elders, faded stories changed slightly with each telling. Survival was not framed as advancement, but as participation in cycles that did not care about ambition or legacy. This understanding shaped the human nervous system far more deeply than civilization ever could. The missing thousands of years were not waiting rooms for cities. They were whole worlds complete in themselves. People lived and loved, struggled, rested and died, without knowing they were before anything. Their lives did not point toward us. They stood on their own sufficient and meaningful without future validation. Recognizing this removes a quiet burden. We often carry the belief that our lives must justify themselves by producing something permanent or exceptional. As you lie here now, the weight of that belief can soften. Your ancestors did not carry history as obligation. They carried it as instinct, habit, and rhythm. Memory lived in the body in reflexes shaped by countless repetitions. When danger passed, muscles relaxed. When night fell and the fire dimmed, eyes closed. Trust was not philosophical. It was learned through survival, repeated often enough to make rest possible. Final is the return to that simplicity not as ignorance but as clarity, without excess. It is the realization that being human has never required complete understanding. Our species survived ice ages, droughts, and migrations without knowing why the world changed, only that it did. Curiosity mattered, but so did acceptance. The balance between asking questions and letting them remain unanswered preserved both sanity and life. Listening in the deepest sense is what remains now. Not listening for information, but listening for reassurance. The quiet hum beneath everything has not stopped. Even through walls and roofs, planetary motion continues. The Earth turns at the same steady speed it has always turned. The atmosphere moves in slow currents. Radiation from distant stars passes through your body harmlessly, as it has passed through every human who has ever lived. You're not separate from these processes, you never were. I think of ancient nights countless and unrecorded when people lay down without knowing what the morning would bring. There were no forecasts, no guarantees, yet they slept. Not because they were careless, but because sleep itself was a survival tool. Rest restored the body, sharpened perception, and made adaptation possible. Vigilance without rest leads only to collapse. This lesson was learned early and remembered deeply. Final invites that trust back into the present moment. Not blind faith, but earned confidence in continuity. Your ancestors endured near extinction more than once. Genetic bottlenecks reduced humanity to a fragile thread. And yet cooperation, empathy, and shared knowledge carried that thread forward. You exist because rest was possible even in dangerous worlds. That inheritance lives inside you now, regardless of how modern life frames sleep as optional or expendable. Sleep is not an escape from meaning. It is where meaning reorganizes itself without conscious effort. Memory settles into patterns, emotion finds proportion. The nervous system recalibrates from constant alertness back toward balance. This process is ancient. It worked long before we named it. It does not require understanding to function. It only requires permission. As the mind loosens its grip, fragments of the journey may surface and fade. A cave wall illuminated by flickering light. Footprints crossing a shoreline now submerged. Hands shaping stone or weaving fibre. These images do not need explanation. They are echoes, not messages. They pass through awareness the way dreams do, carrying feeling rather than instruction. Final is where stories return to silence, where language loses its edges and dissolves back into sensation, where curiosity rests beside acceptance without conflict. This balance sustained humanity far longer than ambition ever has. The drive to conquer, to dominate, to outpace limits is recent. The ability to belong, to cooperate, to rest is ancient. If there is one quiet truth carried forward from the missing years, it is this: being human was never about standing above the world. It was about fitting into it well enough to remain. Belonging required attention, restraint, patience, and care. Rest was sacred not because it was indulgent, but because it preserved life. Without rest, nothing endured. Tonight you are allowed to belong without effort, to exist without performing usefulness, to rest without justifying it. The universe does not require your wakefulness. It has turned countless times without your supervision. Stars will burn, winds will move, tides will rise and fall, whether you are conscious of them or not. Your vigilance is not needed right now. As this final moment unfolds, the journey dissolves into simple experience. The weight of the body, the slow rhythm of breath, the gentle pull downward not as falling but as being held, gravity as memory drawing matter toward stillness, silence as the universe thinking unhurried and unconcerned with conclusions. You are not separate from the deep past you have travelled through. You're its continuation not as symbol, but as biology. A living chapter written in pulse breath and sleep. The story does not end here. It simply grows quiet enough for you to drift inside it without resistance. Some mysteries were never meant to be solved. They were meant to be lived alongside, observed gently, and carried without strain. You do not need answers to rest. You do not need certainty to belong. The same stars that watched over hunters, gatherers, and wanderers are still above you now, even if light hides them from view. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. There is nothing left to prepare for, no threshold to cross, no final insight waiting just beyond the next sentence. What remains is presence without effort, awareness without tension. The deep past does not ask to be remembered clearly. It asks only to be felt dimly, the way gravity is felt, the way warmth spreads when the body finally stops resisting rest. Long before anyone imagined an afterlife or a destiny, or a purpose written into the sky, sleep itself was enough. It restored strength. It softened fear. It allowed the mind to release images that could not be acted upon until morning. Night was not wasted time. It was repair. It was mercy built into biology. Your ancestors trusted this without needing to name it. They lay down knowing that the dark would pass because it always had. Even when winters were long, even when hunger pressed close, even when losses were fresh, sleep returned again and again, a quiet ally that asked for nothing in return. This trust shaped the species as much as any tool or idea. You are carrying that trust now, even if modern life has taught you to doubt it. Even if screens glow late and thoughts race forward instead of settling downward. Beneath all of that, the ancient system still functions. The same chemistry, the same rhythms, the same slow descent waiting patiently for permission. As your awareness continues to soften, time loosens its grip. Minutes lose their edges. The distinction between before and after fades. This is not disorientation. It is alignment. For most of human history, time was not measured in units. It was sensed through light, temperature, hunger, and rest. Sleep was the deepest marker of all. In this state, you do not need to hold the story anymore. You do not need to remember details, timelines, names, or questions. The knowledge that matters has already done its work. It has reminded your body that it belongs to something older than urgency, older than achievement, older than fear. Somewhere far beyond walls and cities, the planet continues its slow turning. Somewhere deep beneath layers of rock pressure builds and releases. Somewhere stars collapse and ignite without concern for witnesses. None of this requires your attention to continue. You are allowed to rest within it. If thoughts still drift through, let them. They will thin on their own. If images surface, let them blur. Nothing here needs to be resolved. Nothing is unfinished. This moment is complete exactly as it is. Sleep is not a disappearance. It is a return to a quieter mode of being. The same mode that carried humanity through ice ages, migrations and long nights beneath unfamiliar skies. The same mode that repaired bodies, bonded groups, and allowed life to continue despite uncertainty. Now you can release the last trace of effort. The breath knows where to go. The body knows how to sink. The mind knows how to dim. You're safe enough to rest. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. We've reached the edge of tonight's story, traveller. Together we've drifted through vanished coastlines and silent caves across centuries that left no monuments behind, only echoes pressed into stone and memory. The lantern light grows softer now. The chamber closes not in certainty, but in quiet acceptance. The universe does not hurry to explain itself. The past remains unfinished not because it is broken, but because it is still alive, moving beneath the surface, reshaping what we think we know. Somewhere in that silence answers rest beside questions, waiting without urgency. It's all right to feel small here. Smallness is not fear, it is perspective. Against the slow turning of planets and the long patience of Earth, our brief awareness becomes something rare and tender. Gravity holds us. Time carries us. Memory lingers like warmth after a fire has gone out. Some truths don't demand answers. They ask only that we notice them, that we listen. As the story fades, remember this: the people who came before you were not lost. They were navigating the same darkness, guided by the same stars, trusting the same quiet rhythms. Their questions live on in you, not as burdens, but as gentle sparks of curiosity. So rest now, observer. Let the ruins fall back into shadow. Let the universe continue its long, patient work. Stay curious. Rest well, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. And if sleep has not yet taken you, that's all right too. Sometimes the mind lingers at the threshold, listening for one last sound, one last reassurance. Let it linger gently. Nothing here needs to be resolved tonight. Beyond this moment, the universe continues exactly as it always has. Stars, burning oceans, breathing time, unfolding without witnesses. You are carried within that motion, not separate from it, not forgotten. When you wake, the world will still be here, and when you sleep, it will keep turning without effort or concern. For now, allow the silence to finish the story in its own way.